Frank's ex-girlfriend returns, and they hit it off. I became the laughingstock of our social circle. I prepared for divorce, but Wanda Johnson blamed me. Just stay at home quietly. Don't forget your place. I'm poor, but what they don't know is that I'm actually the son of a billionaire. After the divorce, Wanda Johnson begged me to reconcile, crying. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. In the noisy private room, everyone was making a commotion. Wanda Johnson raised an eyebrow, leaned forward, and wrapped her arms around Aaron Williams' waist, kissing him. Laughter erupted around them, rising and falling. Tsk tisk. That's one solid green hat he's wearing. After all, he married into the family, and he's just a substitute. Even if they had sex right here, Frank Smith wouldn't dare make a peep. Ultimate love brain, huh? Ha ha ha. I silently clenched my fists. They were right. I did marry into the family. At the time, Wanda Johnson treated me extremely well, helping me pay the high medical bills when my grandmother fell ill. When everyone said she was just playing around, Wanda Johnson held a grand wedding for me, silencing all the gossip. She was an only child, and I had no attachments. My grandmother, who cared for me, had passed away. I thought I only had Wanda Johnson left, but reality dealt me a heavy blow. The night was dark as ink when Wanda Johnson came in, drunk and covered in frost. Perhaps it was because I hadn't prepared sobering soup for her as usual. Wanda Johnson came over and patted my face. What's wrong, unhappy? It's just a game of truth or dare. Don't be a sore loser. Her words were full of reproach for my immaturity. Aaron has depression. Can't you be more understanding? Would it kill you to be more generous? You're so ill-mannered. Wanda Johnson finished scolding me and fell asleep immediately. This was the harshest she had spoken to me in all these years. Depression. Whenever there was the slightest issue, like how to match clothes, Aaron Williams would weekly call for Wanda Johnson. The deepest impression I had was when it was time to pay respects on the first anniversary of my grandmother's death. In our custom, husband and wife should go together. That day, it poured rain, soaking me to the bone. Until nightfall, Wanda Johnson never came. When I returned, she repeatedly apologized to me, buying gifts and finding ways to coax me. Wanda Johnson got up and was surprised to see the food on the table. After all, I used to go around several blocks to queue for a long time to buy her favorite breakfast. After she finished eating, I placed the divorce agreement in front of her. Wanda Johnson took a deep breath and glared at me. There's a limit to acting up. Don't take it too far. She casually tossed the divorce agreement into the trash can. I've been supporting you all day, not letting you work, and this is how you repay me? No wonder people say you're a drama queen. Everything should be in moderation. Wanda Johnson told me to think it over carefully, then turned and left with her head held high. I rode my bike to the Smith Group. No one could have guessed that the company Wanda Johnson had to respect was related to me. The CEO personally came over, grasping my hand with tears in his eyes. You've finally come to your senses. A while back, the CEO had come to find me. He said he was my grandfather, and that year, due to a deadly feud, I had been kidnapped and abandoned as a baby. Perhaps grandfather was wise and knew what kind of person Wanda Johnson was. He told me to divorce her and come back to inherit the family fortune. I refused. Now I think, how can a woman be more fragrant than money? Within half a month, I had already mastered the content and gotten the hang of things. The CEO kept praising me for my talent. I wasn't at home, and Wanda Johnson never asked a single question. We were like strangers passing by. A friend told me that Wanda Johnson had said harsh words about giving me the cold shoulder, wanting to make me apologize to her. If certain people just kneel down and apologize to me and Aaron, we can put this matter behind us. I watched the video Wanda Johnson posted on social media and found it laughable. My friend reminded me, and I realized she had canceled the card she had given me earlier. So be it, I never used it anyway. I landed a big deal at the company and took my colleagues out for a meal. I booked a luxury restaurant, and they were excitedly cheering. But there, I saw Wanda Johnson, gently peeling shrimp for Aaron Williams. I paused slightly, remembering how on my birthday, she had peeled an entire bowl of shrimp for me, urging me to eat quickly. To not disappoint her, I forced myself to finish it. I went into anaphylactic shock and almost died. I forgot. I thought you loved it. She cried inconsolably, and I couldn't say anything. Wanda Johnson saw me and frowned as she walked over. Why are you being so stubborn? You don't need to come to such an expensive restaurant just to see me. Aaron Williams hid behind Wanda Johnson, timidly looking at me. Brother Smith, don't be angry with Wanda because of me. I'm not worth it. He lowered his head, wiping away tears. Wanda Johnson patted his back sympathetically. I thought if no one was around, they would probably be embracing and comforting each other. You're thinking too much. For you two? Not worth it. I replied coldly. Wanda Johnson couldn't take it and tried to grab my wrist, but I dodged. Are you still pretending? If you just apologize to both of us, I'll pay for you and we can make up. Hearing her words, I felt a sharp pain. Apologize for interrupting your good time? I turned and had someone swipe the card. Wanda Johnson frowned deeply, her face turning ugly, telling me not to do anything illegal. Mr. Smith, an employee behind me immediately called out. Wanda Johnson was stunned, finding it hard to believe. Indeed, it was quite unbelievable. Back then, when she said she didn't like me being in the public eye, I stayed at home. She never expected that one day the caged bird would fly out. The Smith Group's chairman, seeing my good performance, introduced me to a business partner, Davina King, a well-known cold beauty in our circle. I had only been fortunate enough to meet her once. Through our conversation, I found Davina to be excellent and efficient in handling matters. We chatted for a long time, and I didn't notice the blush creeping up to the tips of her ears. Suddenly, someone walked towards us, and Davina got splashed with a glass of water. Is this the reason you betrayed me? Wanda Johnson glared at me fiercely. I handed Davina a tissue and turned to throw a cup of coffee back at Wanda. Wanda wiped her face, jumping with anger. You're treating me like this for this woman? She tried to grab Davina's hair but was kicked to the ground. Davina patted off non-existent dust from her clothes, looking at Wanda with disdain. I held back Wanda, who wanted to lash out. Her face turned as dark as ink, and she only left after saying "fine" several times. She can't handle this? When Aaron Williams used to cut his finger, she would blame it on me and force me to apologize. Now, when it happens to her, she can't take it. I'm sorry, I said. Davina shook her head. You too. She hesitated. It's almost over, I replied. She nodded, and for some reason, I could tell she seemed a bit happy. We exchanged contact information. I realized I had left something at the Johnsons' house. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were sitting on the sofa, glancing at me. Stop right there. Mrs. Johnson slapped a cane on the table, gesturing for me to come over. I smiled at her. Mrs. Johnson stood up abruptly, trying to grab me. I dodged to the side. Mrs. Johnson sat down, panting heavily. I see you've really grown wings now, daring to cheat on others. Since you've entered our family, you must follow the rules, or else you won't be tolerated. Oh, Frank, if you just apologize, we won't mind anymore. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson have always been like this, one playing the bad cop, the other the good cop. It only makes me reflect. They set a curfew for me every day, made me bring them foot-washing water every night, forbade me from being in the public eye, and demanded I be filial to them. If I disobeyed even slightly, Mrs. Johnson would beat me with the cane and punish me by making me kneel in the ancestral hall. The cane's barbs hurt badly. Mrs. Johnson accused me of cheating, her mouth running nonstop. Calmly, I took out some photos and threw them in their faces. The photos showed Wanda Johnson and Aaron Williams swimming together, kissing, and hugging while chatting. Mrs. Johnson picked up the photos, her face alternating between green and white. She tore the photos to shreds. Stop slandering my daughter. Mrs. Johnson clutched her heart and collapsed. Mr. Johnson told me to call 120, but I went straight upstairs to get my things. Mr. Johnson cursed at me, calling me a beast. I looked at them coldly. Mrs. Johnson always loved to use little tricks, and pretending to be sick was her constant. I only took my own things, not touching anything else. In the evening, Wanda Johnson called, berating me right away. "Do you know my mom got sick because of you? Come take care of our mom quickly. Even if you're playing hard to get, there should be a limit." I laughed bitterly. "That's your mom. When do you have time to get the marriage certificate?" The other end went silent. I blocked the number. Alone now, having a drink and raising a small dog. How lovely. Now, without constraints, I can buy whatever I want. At Davina King's birthday party, many guests attended. Wanda Johnson glanced at me and pulled me outside. "Where's the bracelet? The one you bought at a high price at the auction the other day." "What? It wasn't for you." "Stop joking. I know you bought the bracelet to please me. After all, you spent 300 million on it. Bring it out quickly, and I might consider forgiving you." I rolled my eyes and ignored her, turning to walk back inside. Wanda Johnson kept staring at me persistently, waiting to see when I would take it out. I looked up at Davina, who was graceful and elegant in her every move. "How did this bracelet end up on your wrist?" Wanda Johnson noticed the bracelet on Davina's hand and rushed onto the stage. "This is my personal matter." Davina raised an eyebrow. "You're really shameless." Davina raised her hand and slapped her. "If you don't know how to speak, I don't mind helping your parents educate you a bit." Wanda Johnson saw the cake cart coming and gave it a push. I gently kicked it, and the cake cart headed right towards where Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were standing. Both of them were covered in cream, looking extremely embarrassed. Someone couldn't help but laugh. "Enough. Come back with me." Wanda Johnson came to grab my hand, but I dodged. "How come now you're the one sucking up to someone else? No wonder you could become CEO." "Stop it. I can give you everything she gives you." "Brother Smith, don't be unreasonable. Just say some nice words and it'll be over. After all, your relationship with them is incomparable." Aaron Williams tried to persuade me. "So that's why certain people have been sucking up to someone new lately. I was wondering how they could afford such an expensive car." "What if that's not the case?" I replied. "How could it not be? He even agreed to marry into their family. I'm telling you, if they told him to get on the ground and bark like a dog, he'd do it." People around whispered among themselves. Wanda Johnson's smile grew wider. "I did indeed like Miss Johnson before, but not anymore. I know Miss Johnson's heart belongs to someone else. May I ask when we can get divorced?" I said seriously. Wanda Johnson frowned, her eyes dimming for a moment. "Fine, anytime. But remember, there's no medicine for regret," she said defiantly. I knew Wanda Johnson cared about her pride, so I was putting her on a pedestal now. I ignored the discussions of those around us. Davina King winked at me. The day we went to get divorced was just like our wedding day, with the sun shining brightly. "It's not too late if you want to change your mind," Wanda Johnson asked at the last moment, her voice a bit panicked. "I won't regret it." With the divorce certificate in hand, I felt particularly relaxed. Aaron Williams was waiting there obediently. Wanda Johnson was distracted, glancing at me several times. "You can come to me if you need anything in the future." "No need." I left with style. I treated Davina King to a meal. After spending time together, I found she wasn't as aloof as I thought, but rather a shy girl. I felt she understood me well, from food preferences to clothing choices. When grandfather said the King family wanted to arrange a marriage with me, I was taken aback. I made excuses, saying the other party might not agree. Davina King's eyes were misty, with a hint of alcohol, as she lifted my sleeve. The ugly scar on my arm was exposed, and I instinctively wanted to cover it. "I've liked you for a long time, since way back," she said. Before I could react, she continued to explain, word by word. It turned out that the girl I had saved in the mountain area was Davina King. When the fire was raging, I rushed in to save the girl, and my arm was left with a scar. Love can be short-lived or long-lasting. I looked at the girl who had fallen into my arms and smiled. The news of the engagement between the young master of the Smith family and the eldest daughter of the King family spread instantly. Those who had mocked me before, not realizing my true identity, now came to apologize and curry favor. They suppressed the Johnson group just to appease me. For every day I didn't say a word, they spent a day on tenterhooks. Power could be so effective. Meanwhile, Wanda Johnson seemed to have gone mad, calling and texting me daily, saying she regretted it, that she had only meant to test me, but never thought I was serious. She complained about why I hadn't told her my true identity, saying that if she had known, things might have turned out differently. Ridiculous, even if she had known, we couldn't have started over. The screen was full of sincere words, almost overflowing. I had no choice but to discard the number I had used for so long and get a new one. Wanda Johnson stood outside my house every day, not coming in, just standing there all night. By the next day, the ground would be littered with cigarette butts. And at my doorstep, there would be some things I used to like the wristwatch. Back then, I had insisted on us wearing matching watches, but she had carelessly tossed it aside, finding it tacky. Now, looking at the data on the watch, I knew she had been wearing it all along. I returned all these things, telling the property management to handle it. The neighbors even teased me. "Young man, you should cherish such a sincere girlfriend. Where else can you find someone so good?" "Auntie, that's my ex-wife." The neighbor laughed awkwardly and ran off. On my birthday, many people came. As the party was ending, Wanda Johnson came up to me with a bowl of noodles. "Quick, eat it before it gets cold," she said. I reached out but accidentally knocked over the bowl. "No need. I've already eaten. My fiancé made some, and it was delicious." I didn't need to guess that Wanda Johnson's noodles would be inedibly salty. In the past, I had forced myself to eat them. Wanda Johnson looked at the spilled noodles, lost and muttering to herself. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. You promised you'd always eat the noodles I make. That was on the condition that you wouldn't change." Words spoken in youth are passionate and sincere, but people are the easiest to change. With that one sentence, her shoulders slumped, her lips quivering. She crouched down, hugging the broken bowl. She grabbed a noodle with her hand and ate it, her face contorted. I left, embracing Davina King. Davina King and I share many common interests. She doesn't find me pedantic like Wanda Johnson did. We can talk from dawn to dusk without repeating ourselves. I didn't expect Davina King would start causing trouble again. Wanda Johnson looked at me, holding a painting with both hands. "I brought the painting back," she said, looking at me expectantly. I really liked this painting. She had bought it at a high price at an auction and given it to me. Aaron Williams had said, "I come from a poor family. It's my first time seeing such a painting." Wanda Johnson explained to me, "We can get paintings like this another time. Be good. Let Aaron have this one first." She handed the painting to Aaron without a second thought. Even though I loved it so much that I had to look at it every night before sleeping, I shook my head. "I have many paintings better than this. I really can't appreciate one like yours." Wanda Johnson left, dispirited. She turned back to look at me once more, wanting to say something but holding back. "Is there really no chance for us?" "No," I said without hesitation. I held Davina King's hand as we went to grandmother's grave. Wanda Johnson, who had never come to clean the grave before, was now diligently sweeping it. She left behind a desolate figure. I introduced Davina King to grandmother and stayed for a long time before leaving. Soon after, Davina King and I held a grand wedding that stirred the whole city. After marriage, we were inseparable, though we occasionally bickered. A friend told me that Wanda Johnson had also gotten married, to Aaron Williams. However, it wasn't ideal. Wanda Johnson would often come home drunk and beat Aaron Williams. She blamed everything on Aaron Williams, saying if it weren't for him, things wouldn't be like this today. It's funny how the ideal love became insignificant, while the substitute became true love. Mrs. Johnson would torment Aaron Williams even more than I had been tormented back then. There are many underhanded methods in wealthy families. I didn't concern myself with these matters. I took Davina King on a trip. In the car, she chattered away, planning what we'd do and where we'd play. I felt my heart was full. Suddenly, a large truck came straight at us. I held Davina King tightly, shielding her with all my might. Blood trickled down my forehead, and I could only hear Davina King's anxious voice. Everything went white, and the smell of disinfectant filled the air. Davina King's eyes were red and swollen from crying. When she saw I was awake, she went to press the call button. I soothingly patted her head. Few people had ever treated me like she did, and my heart swelled with sweetness. She told me that when the truck was about to hit us, a small car rushed in, greatly protecting us. We watched the surveillance footage, seeing the small car rush in and get badly dented by the truck. The owner of that small car was Wanda Johnson. I went to see her. Wanda Johnson was lying in a hospital bed. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson seemed to have aged a decade overnight. When she woke up, the doctor said her memory was stuck in high school and was confused. "I'm so scared. I don't like it here. Can you take me away?" We promised to travel the world, eat food from everywhere, go skiing and take photos. "Frank, please take me." I avoided her touch, looking at her performance coldly. We had indeed been to all the places she mentioned. We climbed the Great Wall until our legs nearly gave out, competing to see who could go further. We also went to Qingming Riverside. We played and ran wildly, taking unflattering photos of each other. When her high heel broke, I happily carried her on my back for several streets. We played in the snow together, and when she caught a cold, I ran through several streets to buy her medicine. To strangers who wouldn't envy us as a couple. "I'm married now and love my wife very much." "Thank you. I'll arrange for a caregiver." I hugged Davina King and smiled. "Thank you for saving us. Your husband will be here soon. We'll treat you to dinner another day." With those words, Wanda Johnson turned pale and collapsed on the bed. As we reached the door, a voice came from behind. "I didn't do this for a caregiver. Can't we start over?" Davina King glanced at me, and I quickly hugged her tighter. I knew I'd be in for it tonight, but I didn't mind. This life continued for a month. Aaron Williams slit his wrists and sent a video before attempting suicide, putting me in the spotlight. "I'm insignificant, and no one will care if I die. What man can tolerate his wife loving someone else?" Below was an attached picture. It showed Wanda Johnson and me gazing at each other lovingly. The person who edited the photo was skilled, choosing a sunset setting. What a beautiful picture. My first reaction was to explain to Davina King. She patted my shoulder. "Don't worry, you don't have the guts." I never imagined how she'd change from a cool beauty to this. Perhaps the sight of blood stirred everyone up, and discussions flooded the internet. "There are male homewreckers too, shameless." "Male homewrecker, go die." I immediately posted the original video. There was actually a young nurse in it who had been edited out. When the truth came out, Aaron Williams was viciously attacked online. Aaron Williams asked to meet me at a cafe. We were childhood sweethearts. There was no third party. "If it's just this nonsense, don't bother saying it." He handed me his phone, which played a video. Aaron Williams and Wanda Johnson were embracing each other. "I know you're using him as a substitute." Wanda Johnson didn't respond. When my grandmother saw this scene, she was greatly shocked and fainted. She died without ever finding out the truth. I hadn't discovered anything at the time. I was grateful to Wanda Johnson for providing money to save my grandmother's life, but I also hated that my grandmother died because of them. I leaked a bit of information, and the Johnson group was suppressed, nearly collapsing. The same private room would never see those two people again. Davina King gave birth to twins. When the children were older, I took them to an amusement park. We had a great time on the merry-go-round and the pirate ship. Before we could react, a deranged woman ran up and hugged my daughter. This should have all been mine. Wanda Johnson had white hair, was in tattered clothes, and looked incredibly aged. Sometimes what destroys a person isn't death, but self-torture and repeated torment. My daughter wasn't scared. She just held her nose and looked at her with big, bright eyes. "Auntie, my bathroom is very big. I can lend it to you." In an instant, my daughter was put down, and Wanda Johnson broke down in tears. I immediately rushed over, looking at her coldly while holding my daughter tightly. I think you've all become too complacent. Wanda Johnson wanted to say something, but covered her face in terror, timidly stepping back a few steps. I hugged my daughter and held my wife's hand as we went back. In the evening, Davina King asked me if Wanda Johnson looked quite pitiful. I shook my head. Evil people will eventually face their comeuppance. We shouldn't waste time on those who don't deserve it. Davina King nestled coyly in my arms. The Johnson Group went bankrupt, and Mrs. Johnson once cornered me in the underground parking garage. It's all our fault for being so blind. Come back and reconcile with my daughter. I won't let you be a live-in son-in-law anymore. Our whole family will support you. She deliberately took out a cane and started whipping herself. I watched her performance without saying a word. How she treated me before is how she's treating herself now. She whipped herself until she was covered in wounds, and I walked away without looking back. After the bankruptcy, I heard there were 2 old people begging under the bridge. Years of resentment piled up and exploded. Aaron Williams set the house on fire, and half of Wanda Johnson's face was destroyed. Before the fire engulfed everything, Wanda Johnson was still protecting a box. Aaron Williams burned to death. Wanda Johnson came out mentally unstable and was sent to a psychiatric hospital. The director told me the box contained candied hawthorn skewer sticks and some small trinkets, folded paper cranes, and a sketchbook. Oh, the candied hawthorns were a gift from me. I didn't expect her to still keep them. But no matter what, she has nothing to do with me anymore. Grandfather adores my 2 children. When he heard my daughter had been taken away before, he was so angry he nearly turned someone's house upside down. My daughter is mischievous, climbing trees and stealing bird eggs. Seeing our daughter becoming increasingly spoiled, Davina King takes on the role of a strict mother, showing no leniency. Our son, on the other hand, is well-behaved. When they're a bit older, Davina King and I will travel and sightsee together. We'll be like young lovers, visiting romantic spots and kissing at the highest point of the Ferris wheel. When we get tired, we'll rest. If it rains, we'll take shelter under the eaves. The future is long, we can take it slow. When we got home, our daughter handed me a glass bottle. She said someone had sent it. I looked at the paper cranes inside the bottle and casually tossed it in the trash. I told my daughter not to accept things from strangers. The glass bottle contained exactly 1,000 paper cranes, sent by Wanda Johnson. Each crane had a different message written on it. She used to use these to coax me in the past. But so what? I looked at my wife's busy figure. Life is sweet. Why let troublesome people disturb our peace? Davina King's side story. I can't believe it. My father sent me to this village to experience life. We have to fetch water every day here. I nearly died of exhaustion. I heard there's a new teacher. Let's see who this big fool is. He's really good looking. I'm ashamed to say my heart skipped a beat. I kept repeating his name to myself. I mustered up the courage to linger around him, but he wouldn't even look at me properly. I thought we wouldn't have any more interaction. Until that day when there was a fire in the house, and I was trapped inside with a child. Frank Smith came in with his mouth and nose covered. He pointed at the dying child, then at me. "I'll come back to save you right away." I nodded, crying. The fire almost engulfed me. I thought I was going to perish in the flames. Fortunately, Frank Smith came back. When the beam was falling, he pressed my head against his chest. He used his arm to shield me. Besides my parents, I never thought someone else would risk their life to protect me. After he recovered, I brought him some high-quality scar removal cream. He waved his hand, refusing it, saying it's fine for a man to have a few scars. I didn't insist. The next day, Frank Smith was smiling like an idiot at a girl. They walked away together, so he could smile at girls after all. After I went back, I did some research. It turned out he had married into his wife's family. I thought if I had him, I would never let him marry into my family. I would cherish him like a treasure. I went abroad. When I came back, I heard Frank Smith had been publicly cuckolded. Surely no one could tolerate that, right? I seized the opportunity to chat with him, only to find out he didn't even remember saving me back then. After he got divorced, I danced with joy. We got engaged. In the end, everything turned out well. Wanda Johnson's side story. People in our circle all said that Frank Smith would do anything I asked. It was true. I asked him to pour drinks for me and Aaron Williams. Right in front of him, I drank the wine he poured and kissed Aaron Williams. I have to say, it was quite thrilling. But I didn't expect Frank Smith to ask for a divorce when he went home. Of course, I wouldn't agree. How could a kept man get above himself? I just needed to ignore him for a while. But I didn't expect him to be so patient. I couldn't help but go find him, only to see he had bought an expensive dress for another woman. Good grief, that dress cost as much as my monthly salary. I couldn't help but taunt him, saying he was being kept by a rich woman. He picked out another dress for someone else. I was furious. Fortunately, Aaron Williams came over and comforted me, which made me feel better. I don't know why, but I preferred Aaron Williams' gentle care. Yet I didn't want to let go of Frank Smith. I couldn't believe he didn't love me anymore. After all, we had several years of feelings between us. Back when we weren't married, he drank himself to the hospital to help me negotiate a contract. After marriage, he always stayed at home and I found it boring. Now he's found a job and become a CEO. I suppose I can accept that. Frank Smith actually dared to provoke me, and in a moment of anger, I agreed to divorce. Despite all the mockery from our social circle, he never divorced me. Now it's come to this? I think he'll surely regret it. I waited and waited, then got the divorce certificate in hand. Frank Smith left with style. Then came the news of the Smith Group's alliance by marriage with the King family. And the young master of the Smith family was Frank Smith. I was shocked for 100 years. Gradually, I realized he truly didn't like me anymore. He was genuinely good to Davina King, not just materially but emotionally too. I suddenly felt that giving him $200,000 a month as pocket money before was an insult to him. At night, I tossed and turned, missing every little thing about him. He'd rather get soaked in the rain than not give me the umbrella. He put an extra-large diamond ring on my finger, making me the happiest bride. He always went along with everything I wanted. When I woke up, it was all just a dream. I went to the snowy mountain peak again and froze for a whole night. So this was how he spent that night back then. I stood him up, and he waited here all night. I went to the temple, and the monk told me not to covet what wasn't meant for me. I couldn't accept it. This love was supposed to be mine in the first place. So I planned a scheme. Yes, I instructed the big car to crash into the small car. I threatened the big car driver's family to make him do my bidding. Unfortunately, Frank Smith didn't fall for it and hired a caregiver instead. That caregiver knew how to torment me. For a moment, I suspected Frank Smith had known about the plot all along and used the caregiver to teach me a lesson while also strengthening their relationship. I thought if only he could come back, my mom would never treat him like that again. Actually, I always knew my mom wasn't very nice to him, but I thought we could just endure it. In the end, my parents disappeared without a trace. Those who once mocked Frank Smith now stepped on me too. When the wall falls, everyone gives it a push. I was burned beyond recognition and thrown into a mental hospital. I took the medicine and fell into an eternal sleep. If I could be reborn, I would take back everything that belongs to me.